like to call the meeting to order. It is 12 noon. First order of business is to approve the meeting minutes from September 26th. Has everybody had a chance to review, and were there any comments from any committee members? Hearing none, consider the minutes from the 26th approved. The next agenda item is the mechanical, electrical, plumbing, leveling budget estimates and emissions analysis. Paul, will you be going through that, or is that somebody else?
Yes, we will.
Perfect.
So I just had to send a meeting link to one of our teammates.
Oh, no worries.
So yeah, thanks for inviting our team today to your meeting. We're going to have ultimately a few options for this community campus plan. There's a rehabilitation option, which we're going through right now. There's going to be a new option and a hybrid. But today we're focusing on the rehabilitation still of the senior center, library, and city hall. At later meetings, we'll discuss other options for these buildings. Our engineers have been working on the components that go into the rehabilitation and dialing in these estimated costs for all of you. At the last meeting, we talked about level 1, 2, and 3, also relating to good, better, best. Now we've developed cost estimates on each of these levels. So we'll discuss alternative energy supplies today and how that plays a part in your cost for each of these buildings. And then finally, we'd like to touch on some of the various funding opportunities that may be available for energy upgrades, depending on timing. Things like focus on energy. So Paul, did you want to share the screen? Thanks.
Okay, so John or Jake, are you on the phone?
Yeah, this is Jake. I'm here.
Okay, so what you see on the screen, and I think you have this in your packet, and we'll also zoom into the different columns. Findorf is on board for the budget pricing for the whole study. So they have Jake Will and John Tucker at Findorf have prepared cost estimates that would correlate with your level 1, 2, and 3 MEP recommendations that Nate just mentioned. So John or Jake?
Sure. So what you see here, it's just really a kind of an overview of which matches the report that was put out by SEH. So for each one of the facilities in the gray there, the library, city hall, senior center, going from top to bottom, you can kind of see what were the comments or the bullet points from SEH. And then as you move right across the screen, you see what the recommendations were and then pricing associated with each one of those. Down at the bottom, before we get too far into the numbers, if you scroll left just a little bit there, guys, you kind of see what we used as a barometer for some of the pricing. So that stems from historical data and some quick questions to some providers on some of the equipment. So you can kind of see where our numbers were built from, just so you have an understanding of that. So yeah, level 1 cost was really a kind of fix a little bit of what's there and make sure it can keep going. You'll see there's still some significant costs, especially with the city hall stuff. Level 2 and 3 is really more where the pricing kind of is more of replacement costs. So level 2 was a lot of fan coil, complete rip out and replace of the mechanical systems. And then the level 3 was adding a geothermal field to the fan coil proposal, the heat pump proposal. So the level 3 there, it's a little bit maybe a little hard to understand what that's all reading down there. SEH provided some metrics for us to analyze with the geothermal field. They're a little outside of what we're used to seeing. So as designed, they had requested 64 bores, and you see the price there. Their anticipated capacity per bore, like I mentioned, was a little bit above what we were used to seeing. So we took the liberty and kind of added a as required number there, what we think would be required for bores. Now, we have only so much space in between the two structures on the north side of the road there. And so doing a quick analysis on Google Maps allows us space for roughly 46 bores on the north side. Now, that doesn't mean we can't add something somewhere else underneath a different parking lot or in some other space, but currently you've got space for about 46 bores on the north side there. So wanted to give you those three different levels within adding a geothermal field. The as designed and as required do offer 100% or anticipate 100% offset of the heating load for all three buildings. Again, this is for all three, not just in any one individually. And then that space available, you can see, is roughly, give or take, half to 2/3 of the overall building capacity. Now, before any of that can be, formally blessed and finalized, there will need to be a test board done at some point in the future to analyze exactly what we can get per bore, and then that'll have a lot more framework around it and what is required and what is needed for space to offset the heating and cooling capacity of the buildings. So.
And so when you say space available, that's all the space in between the senior center and City Hall?
That was under the parking lot. I didn't
That's the
touch any of the green space in between the two.
Okay.
So again, there's options there. I didn't know if that was desired or not, so I just left it to the parking lot, which was kind of the commentary from the report.
Are there questions from the committee members?
So this is the upfront cost, right? Not any overtime payback, but the upfront costs that the cap.
Correct. This is capital cost. There's no life cycle or payback calculations here.
I got a question. Is this for the facilities we have right now as they are to upgrade them?
This is not an operational cost. The costs match the recommendations put forth by SEH in their report as far as the level 1, 2, and 3 improvements to the existing systems.
The existing buildings.
Correct.
Yes.
So, I mean, not to jump the gun, we're gonna spend all this money in old buildings.
I think that's
It doesn't make sense.
right. Yeah, I see where you're coming from. I think the option that they're looking at right now is when the first iteration of this committee, we only looked at new buildings. I think our consultant's new scope includes looking at the existing buildings and comparing that against completely new buildings and a hybrid approach where we might salvage some of the buildings and demolish a new. So I think what we're hearing today, and correct me if I'm wrong, Nate, is just the option to repurpose the existing buildings. But yeah, you're absolutely correct that this money would be spent on old buildings that might have other failures other than just MEP.
Because what I see is, I know I can speak for the senior center, we're at capacity. We're turning people away right now.
Mhm.
And it really doesn't make sense to put all this in and try to upgrade them to geothermal or all electric when you can't get any more people into the building. I mean, that's what's driving this whole mechanism, I think, is the building usage and the space that we have. I mean, I know the city hall here is, pretty small right now too. I don't know what the situation of the library is. But I know the city council, asked this so we get some idea, but I hate to be seeing more money spent on this when that's not even gonna be the course of our action, unless the city council dictates that.
Right. I think this is to maybe help prove the point or the case. Just doing the due diligence to make sure that the city council has all the information available to them to make the right decision for the city. And so I think that's the exercise that our consultants are helping us go through right now. But yeah, back to your point, not only is the senior center lacking in space, I know the library is lacking in space according to their, was it 2016 study that they had done. And anybody that was, we'll go through it later, the tour of the building, but this building, yeah, if you get downstairs, it's pretty scary down there. So yeah, but thanks.
I didn't mean to interrupt, but that was, you know, it's time to make this comment, I think.
No, those are good comments.
I have a question or a comment too. Well, presumably this is to indicate to the public if they ask questions in the future, why we didn't just upgrade the buildings we already had.
Yeah,
Question I have is and maybe this was stated, I missed it somehow, but could somebody summarize what the difference is between the level 2 low and high costs? Basic differences or yeah. Because a lot of those numbers are the same and there must be just a simple explanation for what the differences are. What are they actually showing?
So if you go back down to the range on the bottom left, there you go. You see the VRF provides a range of $65 to $80 per square foot. There's a new refrigerant law that is coming our way with release of equipment. And right now, a lot of mechanical contractors are nervous because they don't exactly understand what it's going to mean or what they have to add as provisions. There's some things that may require shafts in your plenum space to route refrigerant pipe within. There's just a whole litany of things that we're not really super clear on yet on what they mean and what they're going to make us do. So we provided a range there just to kind of cover our bases. Right now things are trending $65 a square foot, but we have heard that things could be trending towards that 80 3 to 5 years from now by the time some of this stuff may be implemented. So I wanted to provide that just as a clarity piece I didn't want to scare anybody with the super high number and wanted to make sure I provided both sets of data.
Okay, thank you.
what
And
does VRF stand for?
VRF stands for variable refrigerant flow.
And what does AHU stand for?
AHU stands for air handling unit.
Okay, thank you.
and the rest of the dollars here are in 2024 dollars. Is that correct?
Correct.
I think back to your point, what could you just I know we went through this last meeting, but just brief overview, like level 1 you mentioned is, just doing the bare minimum to keep these buildings going for the next how many years? Do you have
It all depends. I wasn't the author of the report, so that's
Sure.
probably more targeted to an SEH question. But yeah, level 1 is really taking what you have, doing the necessary repairs now to keep things online. Whether that's an anticipated 5, 10 or beyond. I'm not 100% sure what their anticipation was with their comments. Level 2 is again a complete gut and replace of that system using the VRF style system. And then level 3 is the adder to the level 2, making it a geothermal field. The geothermal, think of it as a thermal battery. It's going to add heating and cooling to that VRF system as necessary, depending on the conditions outside. And then, yeah, that's really those 3.
In
thanks.
the level 2, it's actually less dependence on natural gas and focusing more on electricity.
Correct. Yep.
Is that just is that just electric heat pumps, or is that also sourcing the electrical or electricity on site?
We do have a study. We have some information at the end of the presentation for photovoltaic panels on the
Okay, but
roof.
that's not included in that price.
That's not
It's
included.
bringing in the electricity and just, okay.
Right, just
Sounds
to
good.
run all your air handling units, all your equipment, and then there's no natural gas
Okay,
used at all.
thanks. Go ahead.
And that really begins to speak to the city's goals of 2050, working towards net zero. So there's things you can do now to begin to set you up on that path. And that's what the level 2 and level 3 begin to do.
Thanks, Paul.
At the last meeting, I brought up the concern of the geothermal fields and the proximity to the city wells. Have you evaluated that yet?
If that's directed at me, no, I haven't. I wasn't aware of that. Again, I just took the aerial shot of the parking lot and
Yeah,
did the analysis there.
because my understanding is you're gonna use glycol and that's pretty soluble in water. And I'm not sure what the cone of depression is of a city well on the hill out here, but we're only 4 blocks away from it. I don't know which way the groundwater direction goes. I don't know how much cone of depression that the well has, but I think that needs to be considered so we don't have any threat in the future of contaminating one of our major water supplies. Thank you.
No, that's a good comment. You know, I make a note of it. You know, we're in the master planning phase right now. So some of these things, like the comment you just made, those would be items that we would begin to address as you begin to refine more what your vision is, what you're going to do down here, and what system you're going to select. Because then at that point, then we can get consultants involved to address, you know, how that's going to impact your wells.
It may not impact it, but it's a concern.
Right.
All right, does anybody else have any comments on this particular slide?
Dave Hubka, are you on the phone? On the call?
I am on the call. I was able to get in. Thank you. Good morning. Good afternoon, everybody.
Can you just introduce yourself real quick, please, Dave?
Yeah, hello, I'm Dave Hupka, part of EUA's team, head up their sustainability throughout the firm. HVAC mechanical engineer by trade, but the last 20 plus years I've done sustainability full day, all day, every day.
Mhm. And part of the scope of services in each of these phases that we're looking at, we need to be aware of the energy use that's going to cost you to run these systems.
Yeah.
So what Dave has done, excuse me, he's prepared spreadsheets then to address your energy use for each of those different levels. And that's what he'll go through now for you real quickly.
Yeah, thank you so much, Paul. Just to go through this at a simple high level, a little background where these numbers came from. We do have floor plans for the existing buildings. We do have the existing utility consumption of the existing buildings. I then took a look at what was proposed for the mechanical upgrades. Level 1 upgrades is a simply like for like system. I assumed with the natural gas, if it's like for like, understanding its end of life equipment for the existing, I assumed a 10% reduction in natural gas because we're going to get a little bit of boost in efficiency for the heating for all 3 buildings. Similarly, with the electricity, I understand there's an LED upgrade. That's going to be about a 20% reduction in electricity. So the consumption cost and associated emissions is my estimate of how much energy I think you're going to save if you simply do like for like equipment replacement and then replace the CFLs or the current lighting system with LED lights. Is it perfect? No. Is it an energy model? No. It's a conservative estimate of how much energy I think you're going to save with like for like replacements and the associated emissions that come along with that. So that's level 1 level 1 upgrades. If we go level 2 upgrades, that we're going to take out the existing system and put in this air-cooled VRF heat pumps, which are very energy efficient systems. They trade heat around the building throughout the year rather than dump heat one place and cool another place. So very efficient systems. These are, I estimated to be about 25% more efficient. I would suspect they're closer to 30% more efficient, but nonetheless, you're going to save quite a bit of energy. But this is also the all electric option. Electricity is much more expensive than natural gas. So your energy costs will go up. And our location, Middleton, is on an energy grid that's not very clean yet. It will become clean over the next 10 or 20 years. So technically, when we're in Wisconsin, and Middleton specifically, when we go all electric, our carbon footprint goes up in the short term, but hopefully it'll go down to 0 in the long term as our grid gets cleaner. So those are those numbers there. And then the final option was that geothermal option, which once again is all electric. geothermal systems are in the neighborhood of 40% energy saving when compared to the code compliant or typical HVAC systems. So these numbers reflect a 40% reduction in energy savings or energy consumption, and the associated costs and emissions come along with that. So all three options for each of the three buildings, City Hall, Library, and Senior Center, were laid out. And once again, we didn't do energy modeling. These are just, rules of thumb based on the floor plans, based on the utility bills, and based on what we know these systems are likely to provide with respect to energy cost savings. The EPA or the emissions data I got from the EPA's website, which is a typical website that can be used coast to coast for emissions associated with electricity based on the project location, as well as the emissions associated with the natural gas. So a lot on the table in one slide, but that's where these numbers have come from. Any thoughts, comments, questions?
So it looks like option 3 is a little cheaper annually than option 2, but option 3 also had a upfront cost that was more expensive, obviously, to put in the ground geothermal. Is there a payback time that they would cancel each other out, or would there at no point be a time where the geothermal would actually make sense over the all-electric option?
Yeah, that's a good question. I did not do payback calculations, but we definitely could do the payback. What makes geothermal much more of a good payback system, for lack of better words, is the Inflation Reduction Act. There's dollars that come along with geothermal that are significant. And when I say significant, it's in $1 million territory, depending on the size of the system. So, we could look at what an estimated payback is for the various systems to help, determine, if it's a viable option. But at this point, I did not do a payback calc for these 3 levels of upgrades.
Yeah, that's fine. And then day 1, though, the geothermal would be a lot more sustainable, right? Because looking at our grid in some following slides, we have a lot of coal in our electric grid right now.
Mm-hmm.
And this system would eliminate that entirely. So if we got to the 80 or whatever bores that we were talking about earlier.
Yeah, I mean, option 2 and option 3 are both all electric options. So when you go all electric, you're really beholden to the power plants that serve our utility grid. And it's up to them to push toward more sustainable energy, more renewable energy. Nuclear energy is becoming more and more prevalent, but we go all electric. We did what we can for zeroing out the scope 1 emissions on our site. And then once again, we're beholden to how clean that and how fast that energy grid gets clean. If anybody can call up the power plant and tell them to hurry up, I'd appreciate it. But with those 2 options, we're stuck with how clean that energy grid gets over time.
What if we generate our own energy with solar, though?
Yeah, that's definitely, you can definitely put, I know there's an option coming here at the end of the slide deck for an on-site renewable energy through PV. Yep.
Before we run through the PV analysis, other questions with the energy use?
One other thing, in addition to Justin's comment about the payback, it would be helpful to know which of these meets the city's approved sustainability goals for this particular project. We have another item on the agenda where we're going to talk about implementing the city's sustainability plan. But I don't know if it's as simple as saying yes or no, it meets the goals or it doesn't, but that would be really helpful, I think, too, for decision makers.
Yeah, I think I was just assuming that level 1 didn't meet that, but
Sure,
yeah,
it
it would be
doesn't.
good to just have that formally looked at. And
Yeah, we can definitely touch on that more specifically. It's my understanding net zero 2050 is the typical goals, but let me confirm that. And And what I see as a step one to net zero goals is to get rid of scope one emissions, which means no more natural gas, which puts us right to level 2 or level 3 upgrades. And then, geothermal is going to save you energy when compared to a VRF heat pumps, both great systems. But geothermals do it better with the geo exchange that we can use, below the earth for, once again, our own kind of like heat rejection and vice versa. But let me do some homework on that. But that's my initial thoughts as far as meeting the city's sustainability goals.
And just while I'm thinking about it, I don't know, last time when we first discussed the bores, if the cost per bore was just a typical bore. I know we have a lot of bedrock here in downtown that has caused other projects some headaches in the past. I didn't know if that was taken into account in the pricing for those bores. Just something to keep in mind, I guess, moving forward. But all right, anything else on that last slide that Dave was showing? All right, you guys are good. Go ahead.
Thank you, everybody.
Provide a high-level solar analysis of the panels that you could place on each building, and then roughly what the energy use would be for those, and then a rough budget cost. Now, the one thing we had not done is take a look at the energy produced by these solar panels and then compare that to the energy analysis Dave provided, and then, understand that delta. That's something that we would need to look at moving forward. But in your packet, you at least have that high level analysis. This is illustrating the senior center, and you see the amount of energy produced and then the rough cost. And then we have a little bit of information at the end regarding incentives that are available to you. City Hall, obviously we're able to fit, a fair amount of panels on that roof. A little higher cost, a little higher energy output. And then likewise, the library. So focus on energy, as we're learning, the incentives available are less to the users because there's many more people applying for the grants. But there is some information in here to see, the amount of incentive you would get from focus on energy. But then there's also the Inflation Reduction Act that could help to offset some of that cost. And Dave, I'm not as versed on that. Are you?
Yeah, I do have kind of a cheat sheet calculator for the Inflation Reduction Act with respect to geothermal. I do know that, focus on energy is typically in the 5-digit range, $10,000 type, payback depending on size and scope. But Inflation Reduction Act it's 7-figure territory. We've done a few geothermals on schools, and they've gotten a couple million from the inflation. It's significant. It's a game changer. So it's something that we could also take a look at. That being said, I'm not a tax person. I don't even do my own taxes. So you need to get involved with a tax expert to navigate that properly. But we at least can tell you what the ballpark would look like depending on the size of the geothermal.
Mhm.
This also becomes a political issue, not to get political, but it depends on which administration will continue these programs, correct?
Yeah, I did ask that question too of one of my PV contacts, and they said, yeah, that is definitely a possibility, but the Inflation Reduction Act, it's going to be around for a couple of years.
Okay.
It's not going to it can't get struck out through an executive order. It's going to be there for a couple of years. So we're still okay, but we still want to keep our eye on the pulse of where this might go politically. So that's a great point.
Do they have similar incentives for PV as they do for geothermal?
Correct. Inflation Reduction Act has, and it's in my calculator, my estimate calculator, as far as, amount of PV, you put that in and then it'll calculate what they expect. Same thing with geothermal, and they'll calculate what they expect to provide in funds. So we can do both.
Yeah, it might be helpful to include those numbers in the report, knowing full well that they're not, we can't go,
Yeah.
by it, but
Correct.
if you're talking seven figures, that could greatly change,
Yeah.
what we're talking about here. So that would be
Yeah,
full.
we can do that, and I can share with the team on our end the estimate that I've used in the past, and it's real. Just on that note, focus on energy is nice, money's money, but Inflation Reduction Act, it's a game changer. It's definitely influences decisions. So we can put that together for you too.
As well as that delta would be super helpful, Paul, just to close that loop. And then can you go back to the roof plans real quick?
To which one?
The roof plans.
Oh, sure.
I was just wondering, so you have the ones on the library, just on the slope portion of the
Correct.
south facing roof.
Correct.
The other buildings have flat roofs, correct?
Yes.
Is there any reason that we couldn't also put it on the flat portion of the library, the southern, like to gain that space, or was there a reason that was left
No,
out?
you certainly could.
Okay, yeah, it might be nice just to max out and then we can back out from there, but that would give us our maximum amount.
And before installing the PV arrays on each of the buildings, if they were in these configuration, there would need to be just a structural analysis. Oh, sure. Go ahead, Jeff.
So if you look in the report there on the library, it does say that the current electric service can only support 240 amps. And so that's one of the reasons that this analysis did not include that. But if there are other infrastructure power distribution changes, it could support more. And we'd have to look at also the building's usage, electric usage, and if you wanted to exceed with solar to produce more, could that offset maybe some other buildings? And that's something that could be looked at, but that's where the limitation was at this time.
Okay, thank you. That was helpful.
I got one of the,
Yeah, go ahead.
how much partnering do you have to do with Madison Gas and Electric on these proposals? I mean, the city went with Madison Gas and Electric to put in solar farms out at the airport and the maintenance garage, but is there much of a feedback from Madison Gas and Electric on this? Is there any emphasis by them, or what's their feelings about this?
I know the city has been working with MG&E on the solar panels out at the airport. I mean, yeah, we would certainly work with them, working in, with the PV panels on the roof, but that's certainly that they'd be involved. I don't know, they can't tell you to do it or not to do it.
Yeah.
That's entirely up to the city.
I think there's a couple ways that we would interact with MG&E. One is through their net metering agreement, where they only allow the meter to spin forward and backward, up to, I think it's 100 kilowatts. So you really want that benefit, because otherwise, if you're overproducing during a certain time of day, then they're maybe only paying you pennies for the excess. So the net metering that limitation is what kind of makes the solar like more financially feasible. With the airport project, they actually own that array. We don't use anywhere near 5 megawatts of electricity at the airport. So they own that array and we lease the land. We entered into an agreement with them for credits for some of what is generated. But I think what's being proposed here would be that the city would own these. Is that right? These would just be like very straightforward. The city would own them and receive the generation.
Oh, sure.
So this is Jeff Mathis, by the way, for the people that are remote. But to continue on that, so these arrays here, let's see, they're around 100 kilowatt AC, which is what the grid, what MG&E would see. And these would be more considered a commercial sized installation where it's a fairly straightforward application for service. Whereas like at the airport with that 5 megawatt, that is a much larger, utility scale type installation that's kind of in a different ball game, if you will, different sector. So that's where, not guaranteeing, but I would believe that this would be a fairly standard type installation with you, electric utility. And so you just go back to that net metering agreement that is kind of prescriptive of it's a standard thing and not to the size where they're going to be like, whoa, can we handle this? Let's do an analysis. It should be fairly straightforward.
Do you think it would exceed the 100?
Well, these arrays right here, Middleton, the city hall's at 100. The public library is at 86. Can you go down to the senior center? What that is at? Senior center's at 43. So
Okay.
the maximum of this is not over that 100. And so if you had no load and the solar is producing at peak, maybe the city hall would hit that, but that scenario is.
Well, I was thinking along the lines of some batteries. There's been great strides in batteries. Some of that excess energy could put into batteries that we could use. I don't know what the cost of that is.
Yeah, and that's.
It's beyond the scope of this, but I was just
Yeah,
thinking it.
and battery storage with solar PV with battery storage is becoming more prevalent. And it goes back to if you do have the PV generating more, then the building is consuming and you do get those pennies on the dollar from the utility. You can dump that into battery storage and then the on-site generation is expanding the time that it's being used. I don't know if that's you're kind of flattening out that curve. And so at night when the sun isn't shining and you're paying retail rate, you can pull that out of the batteries and limit that retail rate rather than getting paid wholesale rate during the day. That kind of cost shifting to maximizing your payback, but you have the cost of battery. So it's another,
Yeah. That's beyond the scope of this, but.
yeah,
it's just
but that's definitely, and batteries are getting less expensive. So that is becoming a more prevalent thing that you see out in the market.
Not to slow us down anymore, but we might want to consider creating a resilience center at our library like Sun Prairie is doing with the batteries. Just want to throw that option out there.
All right, any other comments from the committee? All right, I think we can jump to the next slide. Did you guys have any more on this
No,
or?
that was all we have.
Okay, I think next we have Laura here from the Sustainability Committee to talk about the purchasing policy implementation plan. It's a mouthful.
Well, thank you for inviting me. I'm just here to, you see I'm here to talk about the Sustainable Purchasing Policy Implementation Plan. So the purchasing policy was passed in 2023, and we have been working on an implementation plan to help staff implement what's in the policy. And so we have put together a plan. We've talked to staff multiple times, and right now this plan is in committees such as yours, and it's going to Public Works and to Senior Center, so we're gathering more information. Essentially, this plan, we include an overview, the prioritization, flow chart, guidance for each category, measurement, timeline, and a checklist. The things that are probably most pertinent to this committee are what are our priorities? And again, we followed the city policy and all of the climate and energy goals and environmental stewardship policies that exist in all of these city plans and policies. Our highest category prioritization is climate and energy. And so that probably matters most to this committee in terms of like the HVAC and reducing our natural gas appliance. Since we're talking about buildings and cement, that category alone counts for about 12% of global greenhouse gas emissions. So we do most of that through bids and contracts. And so we try to put some language in there to help, excuse me, our contractors that we work with. And then, of course, you get down into here into water resource management and chemicals. Each category guidance sheet includes a maxim, which is a general rule of thumb, like what should you be thinking about when you're making these purchases, standards, which are pulled from city policy, questions to try and aid as they're learning kind of the new process, and various tools. And so we've got, this is an example of the HVAC one that we have, including some of the tools, but others you might be interested in would be the building supplies and things that we covered a little bit earlier. Okay. Here's a copy of the checklist where we try to guide staff through the research process. You'll notice that it talks a lot about using the life cycle analysis tool. So that is something that is very important. The life cycle analysis tool is mainly focused on fleet, but that would be applicable obviously to this committee in terms of working with builders and things like that. And then we also have kind of a decision justification, which might also be helpful for this committee because sometimes it's not obvious what the most sustainable choice is. So we think that that would help also with communication with the public to kind of explain that. And then the budget request process, that's mainly for staff. And a way that we can track it. We can go through the budget, see what was requested, what was funded, and what was actually completed. We do have a 5-year plan to try and execute and really roll this out in a way that is not too cumbersome. So we would start with updating our quotes and bids language and things that affect building and concrete and asphalt. Doing an inventory of our HVAC and natural gas appliances, which you're kind of doing with this particular project as well. Research things like e-procurement. Can we gain some economies of scale there? Update our guidance sheets, things like that. And so we would focus on energy for the first 2 years. That doesn't mean you can't do anything in terms of chemicals and some of the smaller impacts. But the idea is to really focus where our biggest bang for the buck is. And so that's what we'll be working on. And then finally, I just kind of wanted to wrap up a little bit before I kind of take questions or go a little bit deeper. And looking at something that might be similar to this, I tried to look at the Sparks building in Madison. And this is a really cool opportunity for innovation and sustainability. Not all of these points affect us, but some of them really do, such as collecting rainwater so that you could use those for heating and cooling processes. There's things in there to control for, just shade, things you might not necessarily think of, or the infiltration system. One thing we definitely want to do is create an environment that is comfortable for staff to work in, get chemicals out of the building, things like that. And then finally, sustainable purchasing can be very generative. Fiscal responsibility is an important part of that. Sometimes people think it's all just very expensive, but this is where life cycle cost analysis comes into that. And then it is something that is healthier for all. So that's in general the plan. And is there anything that I can go over, help you with in terms of this particular committee?
I don't think so. Thanks, Laura, though. Thanks for sharing and yeah, I'm looking forward to see what else your committee comes up with. But yeah,
Okay.
this is great. And I think it aligns with, like you said, all of the previous work the city's done with their comprehensive plan, et cetera. So thanks for spearheading that effort.
Okay, thank you.
The next thing we have here is the lessons learned from the tours that we took, both locally and in the Milwaukee area. We have about 15 minutes left, I think, to go through this. Oh, sorry.
One thing I was a little bit surprised by was that there weren't a lot of examples of combined facilities. I thought that there would be more options when we started to research, but I did think that the Oak Creek City Hall and Public Library was a really good example that seemed to work pretty well. It was just like roughly in my mind, I thought that the library maybe was a little bit undersized for what we were here, and maybe the city hall was a little oversized. But just in terms of like how they were, they had the shared lobby space, which provided a really nice access point for residents to access different city services and know where to go for that. And they did have some shared conference room spaces, which were really nice. So if anybody didn't get a chance to go to that one, I think go to, if you want to be in there.
The other one that I enjoyed and thought worked well was the Wanakee Senior Center / Community Center. It seemed that the proximity really allowed seniors to have an active lifestyle, and it seemed full. Like when we were there at early in the morning, when you might not expect it to be necessarily full. But I thought that was another one that worked pretty well together. I know included in the packet, there was a bunch of slides. Did we want to go, was the intent to go through that for those that didn't, or just to include those as more of an addenda to? Okay.
Those together, I thought it might help jog memories since it has been a couple months now.
Yeah.
For us. I don't know if you had anything to add on this call, or if you wanted to walk through those, to put together the buildings.
No, I don't think so. I just thought it would be useful to have that little bit of a narrative and the photos to kind of jog our memories as we move through this process of things that we saw. I think, the Wanakee, I think, and Creek stood out as well.
Yeah, the
Oak
one,
Creek was built around a plaza. It seemed like they had a lot of land to work with up
Yeah.
front. Also, I asked about the one building adjacent to it, and it was a senior facility. Not sure if it was a public-private partnership or not, but it was right there next to the library and the city hall, very convenient. And I know that's been a potential idea here. And then another aspect of Oconomowoc as well, they use their facilities to generate revenue. Oconomowoc is right on that beautiful lake, and they have weddings there, multiple weddings every weekend during the summer, and generate boat rentals. And I don't know how much money they generate with that, but certainly a facility in Middleton might provide those kinds of opportunities. Maybe there's a little bit at the senior center now. I don't know if any revenues generated though, but.
Everything's gratis.
This is for private parties and weddings, family, receptions and stuff.
We don't have the staff to,
But that's what Oak Creek had.
yeah.
I'm sorry, Oconomowoc. Very nice setup for that.
I didn't attend those, but the only concern I have is if you start combining all these facilities, then you're gonna have to maybe do a risk analysis. I mean, we're living in times where, some crazy comes in and starts doing things that he shouldn't do. You got all three facilities tied together versus if you have them separate, then, you've at least got two areas secure and one area that could be in jeopardy. I mean, it's just a thing of our times now. The other issue is, since I've lived in Middleton a long time and the railroad tracks is there, that, I kind of watched that and now the trains, particularly hauling to our industrial parks, are hauling a lot of toluenes and xylenes. Besides the grain and cement and gravel that, I don't know what, that Wisconsin Southern's a very good railroad and they'd run a really good line, but there's always that potential out there if they get a derailment. My biggest concern is if they get a derailment between, the two apartment buildings, that Hall owns. I mean, there ain't too much to stop that. It's happening, I don't know if it's worthwhile, if it's in the perusal of our committee to look at something like that or the city council, but we do have to look at some risk assessments if we start combining buildings.
I think one thing that was nice about both Wanakee and Oak Creek was that there was more of a central nave or an interior main street that kind of connected the two, but they were on opposite sides and could close off at different hours if need be, and would then therefore also be able to be shut down in case of
Yeah.
emergency. It wasn't, there was a front door to each that were kind of off of this internal courtyard or nave or like central corridor. So they were separate, but they were also combined. And in the Oak Creek one, there was some conferencing that was also kind of included in that, that could be used by both potentially, but those were kind of the only mixed uses. But it was more of the proximity between them, both for the users, that they could, go from one to the other pretty
It's
seamlessly.
just to live and try.
Oh, absolutely. No, yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And the tour that we took last week, I think they added some additional security just here for those reasons. I think it's definitely an issue that needs to be dealt with and needs to be included in as part of any city building going forward. So
Us seniors
great
can't
point.
move that fast out of a building if we have to scramble.
Understood. Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Another thing I would add about the idea of perhaps combining maybe City Hall and the library is that they seem to be sort of natural partners. We've talked a lot about, there are no fees for services for either of those entities. Both of them exist to support the public good. Whereas when you get into things like the community center and perhaps the senior center, there may be fees for things. And so I think it's important to think about sort of the missions of those organizations if we want to combine them. I did like the concept of Oak Creek's blending of City Hall and the library. I think that we might be able to think more about how those spaces would be used, who would have access to those spaces, and when, especially when City Hall is closed, how those points might be blended. But I think there's great opportunity there.
And I would just point out, I think we're dealing with a much tighter, more urban site than any of the places that we went to were they had a bigger footprint to go with. But anybody else have any comments about any of the tours that? I know personally it was good to, like, I don't know if it was the right way, but I think it was helpful to actually tour our buildings after we visited everybody else, because I had never seen, especially this building, like all the back parts to it, and seen how it's very
Dingy.
yeah, that's a great, thanks. I was trying to come up with a nice word, but that's really appropriate. So. All right, well, does anybody have any new business that they wanted to bring up?
Can I ask a question? Given what we've learned about level one, does it make sense to move it off the table and focus on level 2 and 3? If level 1 is impractical from a cost or any other standpoint, or are we going to continue down the path of looking at all three levels or?
So I guess I'd like, yeah, to ask Abby and the consultants, I'm not sure what's, in your contract, but so the proposal that we see right now is kind of like a draft proposal. I don't know how many more hours or how much more you're intending to include in that, or if this is kind of it. And I think to your point, like if the resources maybe, this gives us a good baseline, it gives us a price, it gives us, three different options, I think a good amount to chew off or look at if we jump to the next couple. I don't know what our next meeting is intended to do or where you guys are at with your analysis of the other two options, or if you've been focusing at
Yeah.
this one right now.
No, having the three options, the rehabilitating option, which we have the sub options here,
Yep.
level 1, 2, and 3. And then the other options that we want to talk with all of you about in future meetings would be the new option and then a hybrid option, maybe part of a building stays or one of the buildings stays and we build new for something else. So that's in future meetings. And we'd also like to discuss the potential for a community center at some point too, if that's something the city wants to pursue or not. So yeah, there's a lot of work to be done. We're going to be going into the next part of this, which is developing the new and the hybrid option with all of your help, obviously. Yeah.
And I think the way to look at this too is like, so this is a plan that's going to take years to, look at all the options and make a decision, then have the construction moving forward. And so with these three options, these can also be used in the near term as needs arise. Like say something actually does fail in your HVAC, you can look at it and say, okay, well, here's our replace in kind. We kind of have a guide. Well, does it make sense to go to a level 2 at this time, replace it with the heat pump, where some of the level 2 and level 3, it's not just a individual siloed replacement. You would need to potentially replace a larger system, like taking out a whole boiler and replacing the heating for a larger area, where if you have an old air handler, it might be more siloed where you could have the opportunity to put in just a heat pump to replace that. So I think this could be, in the near term, it can be used as kind of a guide of letting you know kind of what options you might have in the near term, but then also use it as a guiding document for long term that's going to be out in the horizon in multiple years.
But I would say that Kevin, I think you bring up a really good point because the level 1 is not going to meet the city's goals that have already been kind of like going backwards, and the city also just told us that they want to leader address it. I don't, in my opinion, level 1 wouldn't meet the city's goals.
And so I think maybe the draft that you provided, what I'm hearing from everybody, the draft that you provided, maybe just to add those additional things that we requested today, and maybe that's all we really need at this point. I am curious about, so the new option, right? I think we need to figure out if a community center would be part of that or not, because if it's not, or if it is, I think that makes up a pretty big swath of land. And so I don't know who, did city council ask us to look at that, or is that?
In the expanded scope of work, there is a survey for a community center, but I think that the expanded scope of work does not make a decision about whether or not the community center is needed, and if it is needed, does it belong in the downtown or does it belong somewhere else in the city? So I
Sure.
think that those decisions are all still to be determined.
Okay.
Is there information that the committee could think of that would be helpful for us to gather on the community center for the next meeting?
So back in when we were first doing this, we did have like a needs assessment kind of done for each building. And that gave us a relative gross square footage of what we'd be talking about. It might be nice just to kind of understand what a recommended square footage would be required. And obviously, like, community center, it can take up a huge footprint if we're adding two-story gyms, just volume alone right there, right? Two-story space, very large. And maybe just some recommendations off of what we looked at for similar size communities, like I think the one, I forgot where it was, but that huge one that we went to, that it was like attached to the mall, like I think that might be overkill, and that would not fit in our, that might not fit in like these 2 square blocks combined. Like that thing was huge, but that might also help determine, like, if it comes back and it literally is like half of our square footage, it might not make sense here. So.
Yeah. I know that we've had focus groups. When are we gonna get input? Because that could help make some of the decisions. Is what users really are concerned about, whether they want one separate center, they want a combined center. They want to locate it in the same spot, they want to locate it in different spots. Accessibility is a big thing.
Yeah.
And parking's a big thing that I think at some, I don't know when that comes down the pike on the schedule, but at some point we need input from that.
Great.
Because I think that would dictate, you know, what kind of decisions and recommendations we'd make.
With that, Tom had meetings yesterday, with our first director.
Yes.
They talked about this exact topic. One of the issues that we ran into the first go round is when asking the community what they want. You will get a lot of requests that the city likely cannot fulfill for everyone. Because everybody has an idea of what a community center is and what's needed. Another thought with regard to political distribution is that we might want to have a few options to show the public, just to kind of get their thoughts on them and be able to compare one against another. I think it's a little bit confidential, than just kind of going with an open. So maybe we can talk about public participation at our January meeting to the next month. So maybe that would be good.
But the, you know, the focus group dealt particularly with users of our facilities.
Yes, yeah, that's true.
And I think, you know, at some point, that's kind of important for the city hall. I don't know how the city hall, but certainly the library and the senior center fits in pretty strongly. What their concerns are and what their needs are and what their fears and whatever are. So.
Just so the committee is aware, we're going through and verifying the space needs, the programs from 2019, because that really is outdated. So we're validating the spaces and assumptions we made. Met with senior center, library, and city hall. And as Abby mentioned, Kylie with the Parks Department. So we're getting all that together as well and sending that out for comment to the stakeholders, and we'll refine that once again. So we have that information.
Just curious, so that initial one was like pre-COVID, and then like post-COVID, are the sizes going up quite dramatically, or just
I think,
different
you know,
different
let's,
types of spaces, or what are you seeing?
We'll get the
Like,
information out to you, and then we
Okay.
can have a conversation. But it is interesting though, because there are some programs and needs that have arisen maybe because of COVID, certainly in the senior center. So
Mhm.
that's really kind of interesting to look at and sort of digest
Mhm.
as well.
And then one other thought that I've been mulling over in my head is this hybrid option, and like now touring all 3 buildings, like I think in my mind, the library has the most potential to be repurposed, just because it's for the most part one large open space, where the other 2 are really chopped up and probably need a little more attention. But at the same time, like I feel like that swath of land is like the prime spot just in my head for any future building. So it's like in my mind, I don't know how to, get those 2 conflicting thoughts. So just food for thought for the rest of the committee as well.
This might be for later, but with respect to community center and whether you had gyms or not, you might want to do or get some information from the school district as to what degree their gyms are being used. I used to schedule gyms for the Middleton Basketball Club pre-pandemic. And I know they have a tool online for checking available spaces. But I'm just wondering, since they built Cromery out and Glacier Creek and they have new facilities, to what degree they're being used, or would we need a gym at all, projecting the growth of the city too?
I'm a coach right now for the Middleton Basketball Club, and it is packed. Like we're all over the place, like every like different days, and just to find gym space. And personally, like I think our gym space is being used. I think it's being used right for the youth, but for like adults, I don't see that opportunity in the city right now. Just personally, others might have other comments, but
I know our Parks Department does try to use the school facilities, but they are so limited in what they have available. So there definitely does seem to be a shortage. There's not enough space to meet the demand. So we can talk to Parks about that though and see.
any other thing anybody wants to bring up? Awesome. Well, we went a little after, but I think it was a good conversation. So thanks all. And so we don't have a meeting next month, but we
Oh.
have one in January. So
Yes, and I'll send around an email and a calendar invite to let you know the date for January. It'll be back on our normal schedule.
sounds great. Well, happy holidays to everyone, and we'll see you in the new year. Thanks. Meeting adjourned.